High in the mountains of central Afghanistan, where the air grows thin and the land stretches out in muted tones of brown and pale green, life persists in ways the world rarely sees. Here, in the vast isolation of Hazarajat, communities cling to high plateaus and rolling valleys, shaped by centuries of adaptation to the unforgiving terrain. Mountains rise like natural walls, carving the country into halves, their peaks scraping the sky, their slopes a mix of stone, sparse vegetation, and streams that snake down from glaciers far above. Deserts expand across lower valleys, vast and empty, a canvas of sand and gravel that challenges anyone who dares to traverse it. Yet despite the harshness, life not only survives but thrives. Wild ibex scale vertical cliffs, Himalayan snowcocks patrol exposed ridges, and the Afghan peaker flits between jagged stones, storing sustenance against the brutal winters. It is in this environment that humans have carved their mark, shaping settlements and religious landmarks in ways that mirror the resilience of the land itself. At the heart of these highlands lies the Bameyan Valley, a broad basin at nearly 6,600 feet above sea level, where red and ochre sandstone cliffs glow warmly at sunrise and fade into deep rust by evening. Narrow streams fed by the Hindu Kush cut through fertile fields below, and despite the harsh climate, the valley has been a center of human activity for centuries. It was here along a vital Silk Road junction linking South Asia, Central Asia, and Persia that two monumental standing Buddhas were carved directly into the cliffs. These figures, created between the 6th and 7th centuries, were more than statues. They were a declaration of spiritual presence, visible from miles across the valley, anchoring Bameyan as a cultural and religious hub long before the arrival of Islam. The surrounding cliff faces form a honeycomb of caves, monastic chambers, and meditation spaces where monks traveled between India, Persia, and Central Asia. The narrow doorways lead into dimly lit rooms where walls once bore murals depicting spiritual tales and teachings. Among these works are the world's earliest known oil paintings, their pigments preserved under stone overhangs, centuries ahead of their European counterparts. These caves were living sanctuaries, quiet, isolated, and entirely shaped by the geology around them, offering a space where contemplation, study, and worship intertwined with the rhythms of the land. Walking through the fractured sandstone and gravel slopes below, one glimpses life uniquely adapted to the terrain. The Afghan peaker navigates the angular rock, its movements sudden yet precise, in stark contrast to the enduring stillness of the cliffs above. Higher on exposed ridges, the Himalayan snowcock blends seamlessly with the gray and buff rock, visible only when its call cuts through the alpine silence. Every creature here, from bird to mammal, survives by mastering the contours, the narrow ridges, and the harsh climate, embodying an intimate knowledge of the mountains that humans have long depended upon for survival. To the east, ruins of the Red City, Shah Zohak, cling to a narrow ridge of crimson rock. Once a fortress guarding critical caravan routes, it fell to Mongol forces in the 13th century, leaving behind collapsed towers and scorched masonry. Across the basin, Shahi Galgala, the city of screams, spreads across a rounded hill. Sun-baked mud brick walls mark the remnants of streets, defensive towers, and living spaces, all echoing the violent upheavals that shaped the valley. From these heights, the Bameyan Valley spreads outward, a silent testament to human ambition, belief, and resilience against the forces of nature and conquest alike. West of Bameyan, Bandandy presents a contrasting landscape where pale limestone cliffs encircle a chain of 6 intensely blue lakes. Held back by natural travertine dams formed over centuries by mineral-rich snowmelt, these lakes are a rare oasis in the highland desert. Islamic tradition attributes their formation to a miracle of Imam Ali, and indeed, the still waters glint like gemstones under sunlight. Life here persists in delicate balance. Snow trout swim beneath travertine shelves, while surface birds add subtle motion to the glassy surface, illustrating the improbability of such abundance in this high-altitude, semi-arid environment. Beyond the lakes, the land returns to harsher tones, cliffs harden, vegetation thins, and the remains of Chahel Burj rise like ghosts from wind-carved rock. Built during the Herat period, the fort of 40 towers once defended trade routes linking Bameyan to western Afghanistan. Mongol invasions shattered its defenses, leaving only eroded walls and collapsed towers blending into the cliffs. This pattern of rise and fall repeats across the highlands. Empires and fortresses emerge, thrive, and fade, leaving the land itself as the enduring constant, shaping settlement, agriculture, and survival. Amid this backdrop of isolation and endurance stands the Minaret of Jam, a solitary UNESCO-protected monument built around 1190 by the Herat Empire. Rising roughly 65 meters above the narrow valley where the Jam and Hari rivers converge, it stands as a testament to human precision, adorned with Kufic calligraphy, geometric bands, and Quranic verses carved in intricate spirals. Once part of a capital, now lost to time, the minaret survived floods and earthquakes not by design alone, but by the protective isolation of its location. Its presence reflects a period when empire declared itself not through widespread conquest alone, but through monumentality and artistic achievement, harmonizing human ambition with the landscape that defined it. The narrative shifts gradually westward, where influence transforms into patronage, culture, and scholarship. Herat, set along the fertile Hari River, exemplifies this phase. Inhabited for over 2,500 years, the city rose under successive empires, reaching its peak during the Timurid period. The Herat Citadel, or Kala-i Karadan, dominates the old city with mud brick walls and angular towers, its foundations reaching back to Alexander the Great and expanded by dynasties over centuries. Nearby, the Friday Mosque spreads across a vast courtyard, covered in millions of glazed tiles in blues, turquoise, and gold, reflecting Persian artistic excellence. The mosque, with its geometric patterns and monumental iwans, embodies the city's cultural and religious significance, demonstrating the continuity of human creativity alongside the enduring natural landscape. Beyond Herat, the transition from dense urban centers to open plains illustrates Afghanistan's shifting relationship with geography. Semi-arid grasslands of Baghuz province roll gently between low hills, supporting pastoral life and agriculture reliant on water availability rather than fortification. Villages cluster along river valleys, irrigation sustaining crops, grazing fields, and a way of life intimately tied to seasonal rhythms. The land dictates patterns of movement, settlement, and survival, as it always has, whether through narrow passes like Sabzak or the Salong Pass, each shaped by erosion, snow, rockfall, and centuries of human adaptation. The Hindu Kush looms above these corridors, a jagged stone barrier separating north and south, shaping climate, trade routes, and settlement patterns for millennia. Wildlife, from the Siberian ibex scaling near vertical cliffs to the elusive Himalayan wolf patrolling high plateaus at dawn and dusk, continues to claim these spaces, enforcing the enduring principle that in Afghanistan, geography determines life more than politics or empire ever could. The mountains, rivers, valleys, and cliffs form a complex stage where human and natural history intertwine, producing landscapes that are as breathtaking as they are formidable. The highland story continues with the Wakhan Corridor, a narrow finger of land between Tajikistan, Pakistan, and China. Here, stone villages line the Wakhan River, barley and potato fields marking human adaptation to altitude, isolation, and a short growing season. Marco Polo sheep traverse high ridges with massive spiraled horns. Yaks provide sustenance and transport in wind-swept plateaus above 13,000 feet, and snow leopards occupy inaccessible slopes, all reinforcing the profound connection between life and geography. Human settlements are seasonal, nomadic, and intimately tied to the movement of livestock and the availability of resources, echoing patterns that have persisted for millennia. As the corridor narrows and elevation drops towards southern Afghanistan, the land shifts into sun-baked plains and arid deserts. Kandahar emerges here, founded as Alexandria Araoja by Alexander the Great, later forming the modern Afghan state under Ahmad Shah Durrani. Water engineering in Helmand sustains agriculture across otherwise inhospitable plains, while the Dasht Margo stretches endlessly, a desert demanding skill, experience, and restraint to navigate. Here, human survival is less about fortresses and ornament and more about irrigation, trade, and practical adaptation. Within these cities and villages, daily life continues to carry Afghanistan's heritage forward. Culinary traditions like Kabuli paleo, mantu, ashak, bolani, and slow-cooked stews are living archives, preserving the rhythms of agriculture, trade, family, and celebration. Hospitality, craft, and communal preparation of food reflect a culture shaped less by imperial structures and more by geography, daily work, and social continuity. Carpets, silverwork, and lapis lazuli jewelry tie modern identity directly to the land's resources, showing how human ingenuity adapts, survives, and flourishes alongside the enduring natural world. From the high cliffs of Bameyan to the fertile plains of Kandahar, Afghanistan's story is a continuous thread where geography, history, wildlife, and human resilience interlace. The mountains, rivers, and deserts do not merely frame the story, they define it. Monuments rise and fall, empires wax and wane, and yet life persists, shaped at every turn by the contours of land and the resources it provides. This is a land of extremes, of survival and creativity, where every valley, cliff, and plateau holds a memory of human endeavor intertwined with the immutable force of nature, and where the past is carved not only in stone, but in the enduring rhythms of life itself. Leaving the jagged cliffs and valleys of Bameyan behind, the land gradually opens into a series of broad plains and undulating lowlands. The high-altitude isolation gives way to expanses that have long been arteries of travel, commerce, and conquest. Rivers carve their way through fertile soil, providing lifelines for settlements that emerge like oases in a semi-arid environment. It is here, in the western stretches of Afghanistan, that the city of Herat rises, a jewel of medieval culture and architecture, its skyline historically dominated by minarets, domes, and the flowing arches of Timurid design. Herat's history stretches back over millennia, shaped by its strategic location at the crossroads of Central Asia, Persia, and South Asia. In the 15th century, under the rule of Shah Rukh, son of Timur, Herat became a center of culture, learning, and artistic patronage. Its streets hummed with activity. Scholars debated philosophy and science in madrasas. Calligraphers inked manuscripts in ornate script, and artisans fashioned intricate tiles that would cover domes and portals for centuries. The Friday Mosque, with its blue-tiled majesty and delicate geometric patterns, remains a testament to the Timurid vision, a harmony of mathematics, faith, and artistry where light, shadow, and color interplay with devotion. Beyond the city, the surrounding plains extend into semi-arid steppe, dotted with irrigation canals and small villages. Seasonal rivers and canals create narrow green bands where wheat, barley, and melons grow. Life here is dictated by water and climate. In spring, the plains bloom in muted greens and golds, while summer brings heat that softens the earth and tests endurance. Nomadic shepherds still traverse these lands, moving flocks of sheep and goats along routes their ancestors mapped centuries ago, following the rhythm of grazing and water. These pastoral patterns are ancient, tracing back to periods when Herat itself was a nexus for caravans, traders, and travelers of all sorts. The plains surrounding Herat are not merely passive landscapes. They hold the memory of empire, invasion, and resistance. Stone remnants of caravanserais and watchtowers punctuate the terrain, silent witnesses to centuries of Silk Road traffic. Here, armies marched, merchants bartered, and pilgrims traversed vast distances. The region was shaped by the ebb and flow of rulers, from the Samanids to the Timurids, and later by Afghan dynasties consolidating power. Each period left its mark: architectural styles, agricultural practices, and networks of settlement that remain legible in the layout of fields and villages today. Wildlife in these plains mirrors the balance of human adaptation. Afghan gazelle roam the undulating steppe, moving in cautious herds, while the rare Asiatic cheetah, now nearly vanished, once patrolled the open grasslands. Smaller creatures, from sand foxes to desert hedgehogs, carve niches among sparse shrubs and dry riverbeds. Along rivers, herons, kingfishers, and egrets mark seasonal flows, tracing the watercourses that sustain human and animal life alike. Even in the cultivated zones near Herat, the rhythms of wildlife interweave with human endeavor, a delicate interplay of survival, adaptation, and coexistence. As the plains stretch westward, the terrain narrows into river valleys that lead toward the borderlands of Iran. Here, the agricultural sophistication of Herat's hinterlands becomes more pronounced. Qanats, subterranean channels bringing water from distant hills, demonstrate engineering ingenuity perfected over centuries. These water systems enabled settlements to thrive where rainfall alone would be insufficient, supporting orchards of pomegranates, apricots, and almonds that fill the air with fragrance during spring bloom. Farmers tend to fields in a rhythm dictated by irrigation schedules, seasons, and the sun, carrying forward knowledge passed down through countless generations. Trade and culture also shaped Herat's relationship with its surroundings. Caravans brought silks, spices, and precious metals from Central and South Asia, linking distant civilizations. Artisans translated these goods into works of material culture: rugs, ceramics, and manuscript illuminations that reflected both local aesthetic sensibilities and imported influences. The city's prominence was not only architectural but intellectual. Herat became a hub for scholars, poets, and astronomers, where ideas traveled as freely as commodities. The work of painters like Behzad, who illuminated manuscripts with unmatched detail, exemplifies the fusion of observation, artistry, and precision that defines the region's legacy. Moving north from Herat, the landscape transitions from fertile plains to foothills, gradually giving way to the mountains of the central highlands again. Villages cling to slopes, terraced fields follow contours to prevent erosion, and small forests of wild pistachio and almond offer shelter and sustenance. This topography demanded resilience. Stone walls protect homes against winter snows and summer storms, while narrow paths trace the same routes used for centuries to connect dispersed communities. Life in these regions is a constant negotiation with the land. Its resources, dangers, and patterns define the rhythm of daily existence. Throughout these regions, the memory of conquest, religion, and artistry is ever present. Mosques, minarets, and madrasas are not simply monuments. They are active participants in daily life, guiding time through prayer, learning, and social interaction. Even ruins of past empires hold meaning. Each carved portal, each collapsed wall, each abandoned tower is a witness to human adaptation to geography, to climate, and to political change. The land itself becomes a palimpsest of history, where natural formations and human endeavors overlap, interact, and persist, marking centuries of continuity amid turbulence. In Herat and its surrounding plains, the story of Afghanistan unfolds as a tapestry of geography, culture, and survival. The mountains and valleys of the Central Highlands feed the rivers that nourish the plains. Trade, artistry, agriculture, and scholarship flow along the routes that wind between settlements, leaving traces in architecture, tools, and practices. Wildlife thrives in niches left by human use of the land, illustrating an enduring balance that links natural and human history. And through it all, the people, their knowledge, and their resilience continue to define a land that is as harsh as it is beautiful, as perilous as it is sustaining. Leaving the western plains and the shadow of Herat's minarets behind, the terrain begins a slow ascent toward the central mountains. Here, the land folds into the complex web of ridges and valleys that dominate eastern Afghanistan. Rivers carved from high altitude snowmelt wind their way down from peaks, forming narrow, fertile corridors where settlements cluster like beads along a string. Among these, the city of Kabul rises in a valley framed by rugged hills, its strategic position making it a historical hub of trade, culture, and political power. Kabul's history is long and layered. Situated along the ancient trade routes connecting Central Asia, Persia, and the Indian subcontinent, the city has been a witness to countless migrations, invasions, and cultural exchanges. Its valleys, buffered by surrounding hills, have provided shelter, water, and arable land, allowing civilization to flourish even amid regional instability. Ancient fortresses still perch on hilltops, reminders of a time when controlling the passes was synonymous with controlling the lifelines of commerce and armies. The city itself became a nexus of influence, where traders, scholars, and artisans mingled, blending Persian, Central Asian, and South Asian cultural elements. East of Kabul, the land opens into the Nangarhar province, where the Kabul River carves broad valleys into the mountains, creating corridors rich in agriculture and settlement. The region's climate, warmer and wetter than the highlands, supports orchards, groves, and fields of wheat and maize. Jalalabad, the provincial capital, thrives here as both a trading post and a gateway to the Khyber Pass, connecting Afghanistan to the plains of Pakistan. The river valleys are lined with villages that maintain a rhythm closely tied to irrigation schedules and seasonal flows, their mud brick houses blending with the terraced fields. These valleys are also corridors for wildlife. Himalayan ibex climb the higher slopes, while jackals, foxes, and small carnivores roam the foothills. Migratory birds, drawn to riverine habitats, pass through each season, following patterns established long before human settlement. Even in areas heavily cultivated, wildlife adapts. Herons hunt along irrigation canals, and small rodents and reptiles occupy the margins of fields and orchards. The intersection of human use and natural ecology is pronounced here. Survival depends on balancing agricultural productivity with sustainable access to water and pasture. Trade and human movement along these eastern corridors shaped both culture and infrastructure. Caravans carrying silks, spices, and metals traversed the valleys, resting at small caravanserais that dotted the routes. Alongside commerce, cultural transmission thrived. Manuscripts, artistic styles, and religious ideas flowed from city to village, mingling Persian literary traditions with Central Asian and South Asian influences. Scholars in Jalalabad and Kabul engaged in mathematics, astronomy, and literature, while artisans continued craft traditions honed over centuries. As one moves further east toward the Khyber Pass, the valleys narrow, the terrain becomes steeper, and the influence of the mountains grows more immediate. Here, the land itself dictates human settlement patterns. Villages cling to slopes with access to water, terraced fields follow contours, and narrow paths connect communities in labyrinthine networks. The mountains serve as both barriers and conduits, barriers against large-scale invasion, but conduits for trade, communication, and seasonal migration. Nomadic and semi-nomadic groups continue centuries-old patterns, moving flocks of sheep and goats along defined routes, their lifestyle echoing the rhythms of the land itself. The rivers that drain these highlands also sustain complex ecosystems. Along the Kabul River and its tributaries, riparian forests of poplar, willow, and mulberry provide shelter for birds, mammals, and insects. Freshwater fish, including species unique to Afghan rivers, sustain local diets and commerce. Seasonal floods replenish soils, maintaining fertility even in otherwise arid valleys. The human settlements have long learned to coexist with these rhythms, building irrigation systems, levees, and terraces that harness nature rather than resist it. Beyond the river valleys, the eastern mountains rise sharply, forming a natural bridge toward the Indian subcontinent. Passes like the Khyber and others funnel people, armies, and trade along narrow corridors. The region's geography has shaped history. Empires have come and gone, each leaving traces in fortifications, caravanserais, and urban centers. Yet life continues with remarkable continuity. Farming, herding, craftsmanship, and commerce persist, adapting to both seasonal challenges and political changes. In this part of Afghanistan, the interplay of highland and river valley, mountain and plain, human settlement and wildlife corridor is especially vivid. Civilization thrives where water and soil allow, yet the land retains its authority, dictating routes, seasons, and possibilities. Cities like Kabul and Jalalabad, villages along riverbanks, and nomadic patterns in the mountains are all part of a larger mosaic where geography, ecology, and human ingenuity intersect, creating a dynamic and resilient landscape that links the highlands to South Asia. As the high mountains and northern highlands slowly release their grip, the land begins to flatten and open, though not without introducing its own set of unforgiving conditions. The southern plains of Afghanistan stretch out beneath a relentless sun, where heat and aridity shape life with a precision no law or empire could match. Here, the soil is baked hard under summer rays. The air carries dust in delicate, invisible currents, and survival hinges on access to water, shade, and the labor to manipulate both. The southern deserts are not empty in the sense of being devoid of life. They are active theaters of human adaptation, the subtle movements of both people and animals dictated by a careful reading of geography and seasonal change. At the heart of this southern expanse sits Kandahar, a city that has anchored human settlement for centuries, its history intertwined with trade, empire, and the forging of Afghanistan itself. Founded in antiquity as Alexandria Erosia by the campaigns of Alexander the Great, Kandahar's strategic location at the convergence of plains and the eastern edge of mountain corridors has made it a constant pivot in the flux of regional power. Here, the sun-baked plains are punctuated by broad avenues, low-lying buildings, and clusters of cultivated land that contrast sharply with the jagged verticality of the Hindu Kush to the north. While defense is less immediate than in the highlands, survival is no less deliberate. Water is the lifeblood, channeled from rivers and canals across a landscape that gives little else freely. The Kandahar of today retains echoes of its past. Wide streets that facilitated caravan trade, markets bustling with activity, and the low structures reflecting the adaptation to heat rather than fortification. To the west, the Helmand River cuts a ribbon of life across otherwise inhospitable terrain. The system of canals drawn from its waters represents centuries of ingenuity, connecting villages, fields, and nomadic encampments. These irrigation networks are more than infrastructure. They are survival matrices, determining where wheat and barley can be grown, where orchards can take root, and where animals can be sustained through the dry season. The canals themselves are ancient, their origins a patchwork of techniques handed down from Persian, Greek, and later Afghan engineers. Each bend in the canal, each sluice and embankment, tells the story of a landscape that would refuse habitation without human intervention. Here, civilization is inseparable from engineering, and every settlement reflects the intimate negotiation between human need and the harshness of the desert. Beyond these engineered lifelines stretches the dashed Imargo, literally the desert of death, a name that captures its extreme character. The desert is vast, its surface a shifting tapestry of sand, gravel, and fragmented clay, where daytime temperatures can blister the earth and nighttime cold can freeze moisture into ephemeral frost. Traditional navigation relies not on fixed roads or maps, but on the observation of wind patterns, the subtle shading of sand, the position of the sun, and the constellations overhead. Nomads and caravans learn these rhythms by necessity, timing movement to avoid the desert's extremes and identifying safe spots for rest and water collection. Here, life is less about permanence than about the mastery of motion. Sheep, goats, and camels move in seasonal circuits, grazing and sheltering according to centuries-old knowledge encoded in a memory rather than written law. People, too, moved deliberately, balancing survival with trade, and even the smallest miscalculation can have fatal consequences. Amid the desert, isolated villages cling to the margins where water and soil intersect with human ingenuity. Mud brick homes cluster around wells, the walls thick enough to protect inhabitants from both heat and sandstorms. Courtyards are often planted with date palms, grapevines, or small gardens irrigated by channeling sparse flows. Here, hospitality is not simply a social norm, it is survival. Travelers and traders, whether moving goods along ancient caravan routes or crossing the desert for religious pilgrimage, are received with food and shelter, sometimes for days at a time. Dishes like kabuli polo, mantu, and a shack are not mere meals. They are expressions of resourcefulness, combining grains, vegetables, meat, and preserved fruits to provide sustenance in both flavor and caloric density. Shared meals cement trust, creating networks that extend far beyond the physical limits of the desert itself. Trade has always been the lifeblood of the South. From a time of Alexander through the formation of the Durrani Empire, caravans carried goods between Persia, India, and Central Asia, threading their way across plains and through mountain passes alike. The routes were dangerous. Bandits, extreme weather, and difficult terrain combined to make the South a crucible of endurance. Fortresses and watchtowers sprang up along these corridors, like sentinels recording the passage of centuries. Kandahar itself was both a destination and a waypoint, its markets filled with spices, textiles, metals, and livestock from distant regions. Over time, these trade networks shaped not just wealth, but culture, influencing language, architecture, and social structure across southern Afghanistan. Life beyond the urban centers was dictated almost entirely by seasonal patterns. The agrarian rhythm was intertwined with irrigation cycles and pastoral migrations. Wheat and barley were sown when rivers swelled with snow melt, harvested before the summer heat peaked. Orchards and vegetable plots required careful maintenance of soil and water. Livestock herding was equally strategic, with shepherds guiding goats and sheep along grazing circuits calibrated to avoid overuse of fragile pastures. Villages were tightly knit, multiple generations often sharing households, reflecting a system of care and labor that ensured continuity despite harsh conditions. Knowledge of the land, passed orally through stories, songs, and ritual, became as vital as any formal education. It was a form of literacy written into the very fabric of daily life, one that dictated survival and sustained cultural memory. The southern deserts and plains also bear the scars of conquest and empire. Alexander's campaigns left urban and defensive traces, while later the Durrani Empire codified governance and state formation across the south. The topography itself, however, resisted domination, favoring adaptability over centralized control. Fortifications like Kandahar Citadel were designed as much to control water and trade as to repel armies. Successive empires, Persian, Greek, Mauryan, and Durrani, found that the landscape was an active participant in the region's history, enforcing periods of isolation, creating choke points for trade, and dictating where agriculture could flourish. Even in the present day, the rhythm of the South reflects this historical negotiation with geography. Markets still pulse according to irrigation cycles and seasonal trade. Traditional festivals and rituals are intimately tied to the agricultural calendar, observing planting, harvest, and the arrival of seasonal rains. Music, storytelling, and local crafts preserve the memory of a land that is both unforgiving and generous, teaching resilience through practice rather than theory. Carpets, metalwork, and jewelry embody patterns handed down over centuries, blending aesthetic refinement with practical durability suited to desert life. These objects, like the landscapes themselves, are active participants in the human story, anchoring culture to place and survival to artistry. As one moves west toward the arid margins bordering Iran, the desert begins to flatten further, spreading uninterrupted across the horizon. Villages become sparser, water even more precious. Travel depends on skill, observation, and an intimate understanding of the land. Small irrigation ditches may appear like veins in a parched body, carrying life across vast emptiness. Caravan tracks mark centuries of commerce, often crossing dunes and dry washes. Here, every gesture of human adaptation is amplified, from the shaping of mud bricks to the careful selection of seed and grazing path. Survival becomes a lesson in anticipation and resilience, with generations passing knowledge as carefully as any heirloom. The southern Afghan landscape, in its extremes, is a testament to the human capacity to endure and innovate. Whether in the oasis of Kandahar, the irrigated reaches of the Helmand, or the unforgiving expanse of Dasht-i Margot, life thrives through constant negotiation with climate, soil, and water. Trade, culture, and social structure emerge as mechanisms not merely of prosperity, but of survival. Religion, ritual, and hospitality are not abstract ideals. They're active components of sustaining life. Each meal prepared, each canal maintained, each caravan guided through the desert is a link in a chain that stretches back millennia. And even in silence, when the wind sweeps over the desert, one can hear the echoes of human ingenuity, the subtle hum of endurance, and the persistent pulse of life adapting to one of the harshest environments on Earth. From here, the narrative continues eastward toward the transitional zones where desert gives way to foothills and rivers, and where geography begins to dictate not just survival, but also cultural divergence. The story of southern Afghanistan is therefore not only one of extreme landscapes and resilience, but also of the invisible threads that connect people across centuries of trade, conquest, and adaptation. It is a living continuum of environment shaping human life, belief, and society, a narrative that moves seamlessly from the deserts of Helmand to the highlands, passing through cities, villages, and the enduring rhythms of daily existence. As the southern deserts and wide plains begin to soften, a new landscape emerges, one of rolling foothills, isolated valleys, and the first whispers of mountains that rise again to meet the sky. Between the cadence of the desert and the jagged altitude of the central highlands lies a transitional world where geography begins to shape human life not by extremes, but by nuance, where the land dictates passage through narrow upland corridors, where seasonal water determines settlement patterns, and where the culture of tribes that have inhabited these lands for centuries reveals another layer of Afghanistan's story. From the Helmand Basin, with its irrigation canals and sun-soaked plains, the terrain gradually climbs into the foothills of provinces like Zabul and Ghazni, regions historically marked by the passage of armies, the slow shifting of trade routes, and the resilience of pastoral and agrarian life alike. Here, the earth softens from featureless expanses into a patchwork of low ridges and gentle inclines draped in muted tans, soft greens, and the ochre of limestone outcroppings. Seasonal streams, swollen in the spring by meltwater from distant peaks, feed into narrow irrigation channels that sustain small farms and orchards, supporting wheat and barley in a land that demands attention to water as its most precious resource. Life here is rooted in a rhythm that aligns with the sun and the seasons, but it is also shaped centrally by tribal identity. The people of these regions, among them Pashtun tribes with histories stretching back through classical and medieval times, have developed systems of social order, hospitality, and survival that are inseparable from the land. Hospitality is woven into the fabric of daily life. Offering tea to a traveler is not merely ceremony, but an essential custom tied to survival in climates where shade and water are rare. The tribal code of honor and responsibility, Pashtunwali, echoes in every gesture of welcome, every shared meal, and every negotiated passage through the rugged terrain that surrounds the villages and hamlets. In Ghazni, a city that once played a significant role in the Ghaznavid Empire, the landscape rises toward the central highlands in earnest. This is a place where history and geography intersect in perceptible ways. Ghazni itself was once a center of power, learning, and commerce under Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni in the 10th and 11th centuries, a ruler whose campaigns extended deep into the Indian subcontinent and whose capital became renowned for libraries, scholars, and artisans. Today, the urban footprint traces its layered past, with ancient citadel walls subtly integrated into more recent settlement patterns and quiet mosques that speak not of grandeur, but of continuity. Agriculture here is largely subsistence-based and intimately tied to water. Farmers dig channel after channel, guiding scarce snowmelt from higher elevations into terraced fields that climb the foothills. Woven with these irrigation ditches, villagers plant wheat, barley, and legumes, timing their labor carefully to ensure the best use of water before spring fades into summer heat. On shaded terraces, small gardens yield onions, spinach, and early-season vegetables that supplement the staple grains. In the high summer, as temperatures rise and the water recedes, livestock, sheep and goats primarily, are moved into grazing circuits that depend on careful knowledge of where pasture remains and where shade can be found. These practices are not simply economic. They are cultural, shaped by centuries of intimate interaction between human need and environmental constraint. Beyond the cultivated fields, the foothills blend into higher ridges, where movement becomes dictated by narrow passes and ravines instead of open plains. Caravans once traversed these corridors, slower than in the wide deserts of the south, but no less important. Traders traveled with goods like dried fruits, carpets, minerals, and crafted metalwork, linking the south to the central highlands and beyond. Even today, informal trade continues on these ancient routes, with mule trains and small convoys negotiating tracks that follow centuries-old contours. The presence of such routes reminds travelers that the landscape has long acted not as a barrier, but as a guide, channeling movement, shaping interaction, and allowing communities to relate to one another across distance and topography. Culturally, the region is rich with oral traditions and layered identities. Poets, storytellers, and tribal elders preserve histories through verse and song, recounting tales of ancient heroes, battles, and alliances that shaped settlement patterns. Custom, language, and music vary subtly from valley to valley, influenced by geography and the discrete pathways along which people move. In these uplands, isolation did not equate to stagnation. Rather, it fostered unique blends of culture that reflect both connection and separateness. Travelers moving through these regions would notice how subtle shifts, whether in language, dialect, craft styles, or daily practice, signal the transition from one valley to the next. Yet it is not only human history that imbues this transitional land with meaning. Nature continues to plant its own narrative here as well. As elevation increases and the foothills draw closer to the highlands of Bameyan and the central mountains, wildlife becomes a more prominent presence. On rocky ridges, ibex and mountain goats navigate near vertical slopes with ease, their curved horns tracing arcs against blue sky. Bird species tied to upland environments patrol the wind-swept heights, while smaller mammals, hares, foxes, and marmots, occupy niches in talus slopes and shaded ravines. In these transitional zones, biodiversity mirrors the gradation of the landscape, shifting from plain species in the south to high-altitude specialists as the land climbs in elevation. At night, the silence in these foothills is profound. The wind that swept the southern deserts now gives way to the quiet rustle of leaves in almond groves and the soft calls of nocturnal wildlife. Stars fill the sky without light pollution, constellations familiar to shepherds and farmers alike tracing their patterns overhead. In the west, crickets chirp in rhythm with the cooling air. In the east, owls call softly from shaded gullies. It is here, in the intersection between plains and mountains, that the land seems to speak with a voice both powerful and subtle, whispering histories of movement, survival, conflict, and continuity. As elevation increases on the journey north and east from Ghazni, the terrain once again begins to shape human life with increasing force. The valleys narrow, water becomes even more precious, and seasonal corridors dictate movement rather than roads alone. Rural settlements cling to the slopes where water can be sourced, and winter snows are negotiated seasonally through selective grazing and agricultural timing. This is a land where intimate knowledge of land forms, where a particular rock overhang might shield livestock from snow, or a narrow ravine catches spring runoff, becomes essential knowledge, passed orally and practiced daily. The transition continues deeper into the central highlands, where Afghanistan's geography shifts once more into the complex patterns of mountains, valleys, and water channels that have defined human settlement for millennia. It is in these upland reaches where cultural identity, knowledge of terrain, and historical continuity converge, shaping not only individual lives, but entire communities that have adapted to environment as much as to history. In this part of Afghanistan's inner landscape, the land continues its subtle yet unrelenting dialogue with human life. Cultures adapt to geography. Geography, in turn, adapts to human patterns of use. The rhythm of living, planting, harvesting, migrating, trading, intersects with wildlife patterns, seasonal shifts, and the great overarching cycles of water and climate. Carved into foothills and ascending toward mountains, life here reflects endurance molded by the gentle push of elevation, the seasonal ebb of water, and the cultural continuity that has persisted despite historical upheavals. Yet even as the transitional lands between South and Highlands tell their own story, they also form a bridge, one that connects desert survival with the cultural complexity of urban centers, the tribal intricacies of valley life with the high-altitude challenges of the Afghan interior. From these foothills, the next chapters of Afghanistan's geographical, cultural, and historical tapestry will continue to unfold, drawing us upward into steeper mountains and deeper into the rivers that course through them, into valleys shaped by ancient trade routes and spiritual sanctuaries cut from stone. The landscape shifts once more, and as though crossing an invisible threshold, the foothills of Ghazni and Zabul give way to a renewed spectacle of soaring stone and snow. Mountains rise with a sort of uncompromising authority, their ridges jagged, their slopes steep, and their presence dominating every view. This is the Hindu Kush, a range that stretches across Afghanistan as a formidable spine of rock, snow, and narrow valleys. The human eye instinctively seeks patterns in such terrain, but in the Hindu Kush, there are none. Only contours that twist upward, cliff faces that demand respect, and valleys that funnel water and people alike along ancient lines carved over millennia. Here, geography rediscovers its voice. The mountains do not merely frame daily life, they define it. Elevation becomes a boundary that organizes survival. Weather patterns dictate human movement more than human will, and water flows like lifeblood through valleys that appear impossible to negotiate. Travel in these highlands is not calculated merely by distance on a map. It is measured by elevation gain, access to passes, seasonal snow levels, and the knowledge of where rock overhangs will offer shelter. Roads, when they exist at all, are narrow and carved into steep slopes where a single misstep could mean disaster. For centuries, however, these routes have been the arteries of movement, binding people, empires, and ecosystems into a web that runs from south to north, east to west. One of the most vital of these arteries is the Salong Pass, a corridor that climbs relentlessly through the Hindu Kush, forging a connection between northern and southern Afghanistan that few other natural features could sustain. In the modern era, engineers bored tunnels and laid roads through the pass to support vehicular movement. Yet the essence of Salong is far older. Long before asphalt, caravans and armies made this ascent, guided by seasoned pathfinders who understood the mountain as they would a living language. Snow lingered well into summer in shaded gullies. Avalanches loomed as an ever-present threat, and rockfall was a constant danger. Yet every year, movement continued, dictated by geography, climate, and the imperative of connection. But the Hindu Kush extends far beyond this single pass. Its ridges spread outward like the limbs of an immense stone creature, separating valleys, creating localized weather systems, and reinforcing regional identity. In some places, the land seems to rise impossibly high in short horizontal distance, creating vertical ecologies that change with every 1,000 feet of elevation. Trees give way to shrubs. Shrubs give way to alpine grasses. Alpine grasses give way to rock and snow with no vegetation at all. It is in these upper ecological zones that human settlement almost disappears, giving way first to summer pastures and then to winter migration patterns where only the hardiest livestock and their herders remain. Descending from the western slopes of the Hindu Kush, the land changes again as proximity to wetter winds increases. Rivers cascade into narrow valleys, carving terraces where human ingenuity has shaped agriculture into an art of survival. Terraced fields cling to slopes so steep that the earth itself appears to defy expectation. And yet wheat and barley do grow here, carefully watered through ancient irrigation channels. Villages cluster around water sources, their houses sitting in compact groups so that shade, shelter, and resources can be shared. In these upland environments, every drop of water is precious. Farmers choreograph its movement carefully, cutting channels, building stone embankments, and timing crop cycles with precision born of centuries of observation and practice. Further east, where the land begins to soften against the ridge lines, lies the forested mountains of Nuristan, a region distinct from nearly every other part of Afghanistan. Here, dense stands of pine, cedar, and walnut trees cling to steep slopes, their forests brushing against valleys where sunlight reaches the forest floor only briefly each day. Unlike the stone-dominated high country, Nuristan's timber culture has shaped human architecture and lifestyle. Villages are built of carved timber rather than mud brick or stone, homes insulated and shaped by the material that surrounds them. In the deep shade of these forests, cultural practices endured far longer than in open plains or exposed highlands, preserving unique languages, rituals, and ways of life long after similar traditions vanished elsewhere. These practices reflect not only cultural continuity, but also the influence of geography, where isolation slowed the broader currents of empire and trade, allowing distinct traditions to take root and flourish. Lean valleys complement the forest, where fast-flowing streams cut sinewy paths through rock and soil. Water here moves with the urgency of gravity, cascading over stones, creating pools that reflect sky and nourishing pastures below. Terrace farming persists on more gentle slopes, but the rhythm of life here is governed by the seasons, by snowfall and snowmelt, by the quiet but constant work required to direct water to fields and livestock. Pastoralists move flocks along seasonal circuits, navigating highland pastures in summer and descending to lower valleys when winter's bite becomes too deep. Here, too, wildlife thrives. Himalayan ibex on sheer slopes, foxes and jackals in shaded underbrush, birds of prey riding thermals above. The human presence is an intelligent negotiation with nature, adapting to the forested mountain context rather than reshaping it entirely. Beyond Nuristan, the land narrows into high plateaus and ridgeline corridors that extend toward the northeast, merging into a remarkable and unique region known as the Wakhan Corridor. This narrow finger of land stretches between Tajikistan to the north and Pakistan and China to the south and east, a zone where three towering mountain ranges, the Hindu Kush, Pamir, and Karakoram, converge. The Wakhan is not a place of easy travel. It is a territory defined by altitude, by isolation, and by the persistent belief that life can be shaped by rhythm rather than convenience. Few roads penetrate deeply here. Instead, footpaths and seasonal routes guide the movements of people and livestock, shaped over centuries by the landscape itself rather than by external planners. In the Wakhan, villages are stone clusters set against high ridges, their fields narrow strips along the banks of the Wakhan River, a powerful, swift current fed by snowmelt from glaciers that cling high above. Barley, potatoes, and hardy vegetables grow in these small plots, nurtured by water and protected from winds by stone walls. The Wakhi people, pastoral and agricultural in equal measure, maintain a way of life that is deeply integrated with environmental cycles. Seasonal migration is not simply a tradition here. It is a necessity embedded in the ecological constraints of altitude and climate. Winter here is harsh beyond imagination. Temperatures plunge, snow deepens, and only the most adapted livestock, yaks, sheep, and goats, remain with herders in the lower valleys, sheltered as much as possible from wind and cold. Higher still, the broad plateaus of the Pamir spread outward, lands of gravel plains, snowfields, and unbroken horizons. Here, oxygen is thin and human presence rare. Distances stretch into silence. Visible horizons blur into distant ridge lines, and movement itself becomes a testament to endurance. In these high valleys, the Marco Polo sheep roams, its massive curved horns a dramatic counterpoint to the empty sky. Adapted to thin air and extreme elevation, these creatures traverse slopes and ridges that defy easy human access, embodying the survival of life in near uninhabited spaces. Alongside them, wild yaks move steadily between seasonal pastures, their dense undercoat and resilience to cold allowing them to thrive where oxygen levels approach half that at sea level. Here, too, human life intersects with the demands of the land. The Kyrgyz nomads, one of the few communities that inhabit these high plains, live in white felt yurts dotted across the plateau. Their homes are light, mobile, and designed for a life of seasonal migration. Summer in high pastures close to snowfields. Winter in lower valleys where wind is softer and grass remains accessible. With populations of only a few thousand across the vast Pamir Plateau, the Kyrgyz have preserved a lifestyle little changed over generations. Their survival is an intimate dance with altitude, climatic extremes, and the movements of animals that sustain them. Livestock that provide milk, meat, transport, and, critically, warmth. In this altitude-dominated world, dried yak dung is often the primary cooking fuel, reflecting a brilliant adaptation to a treeless landscape where wood is scarce and life must derive heat from what the environment supplies. Even beyond the human scope, other species reflect the extremity of these high mountains. The snow leopard, ethereal and rarely seen, occupies some of the most inaccessible terrain in the Pamir and Hindu Kush ranges, typically between 10,000 and 17,000 feet elevation. Its pale spotted coat blends with rock and snow, its long tail offering balance on steep slopes and insulation during rest. Sightings are rare even where their numbers persist, yet their presence defines the upper limit of life in these unforgiving peaks. These big cats, elusive hunters of mountain prey, such as ibex and small deer, are symbols of survival at extremes. Their existence a reminder that even in places that seem barren, ecology weaves a dynamic web of interaction. The Wakhan Corridor ultimately terminates at the Wakchur Pass, a boundary marked by glaciers and high ridge lines, where the land gives way toward China. Though historically passable only to caravans and intrepid explorers, the pass today is essentially sealed by ice and altitude, representing the literal end of Afghanistan's inhabited world. Beyond it, the land dissolves into grandeur, mountain watershed giving way to distant horizons, and the movement of people ceases where geography asserts control. Here is a landscape that is defined not by routes or roads, but by elevation, snowfields, and the silent dialogue between rock and sky. Descending from these high reaches, the valleys widen, and the land softens once more. Rivers slow, soils deepen, irrigation becomes possible at lower elevations, and villages reappear with cultivated fields and settled structures. Life transitions from survival at altitude to patterns that emphasize agriculture and social organization. It is a reminder that geography, while absolute in its boundaries, also creates gradients of possibility. From the snow-capped peaks where survival is a measure of endurance, to the valley floors where life expands into farms, orchards, and tight-knit communities. Leaving the soaring heights of the Pamir and Wakhan behind, the land begins its descent once again. Not precipitously, but in a gradual, unfolding way that brings water into focus as the defining force of life. Here, rivers that once thundered down narrow mountain gorges widen into gentler valleys, creating ecosystems that can sustain not only wildlife, but enduring human settlement, agriculture, trade, and the interlocking rhythms of daily existence. The transition from the mountains into broader, lower-lying lands is not abrupt. Instead, it is layered, as if the earth itself knew that survival in these regions depended less on altitude and more on access to water, soil, and seasonal predictability. Flowing west out of the mountain passes, the Kabul River emerges from the eastern highlands with energy and intent. It carries snow melt from distant glaciers, threading its way through steep valleys before eventually broadening into one of eastern Afghanistan's most vital waterways. Along its course, villages and towns cling to riverbanks, their terraced fields cascading down slopes toward the water below. Here, irrigation systems are still the lifeblood of agriculture, with canal networks expanding outward to bring precious water into wheat, maize, and orchard plots. Walnut, mulberry, and pomegranate trees rise above cultivated terraces, demonstrating how communities have engineered the land to suit their needs without severing deep ties with nature. In these river valleys, settlement patterns reflect a long history of adaptation, not just to water, but to seasonal rhythms. Spring brings snow melt that fills canals and reorder fields. Summer heat challenges crops, but also nourishes livestock. Autumn yields harvests, and winter's moisture remaps the land for the next cycle. Houses cluster in dense formations along the valley floors, often with mud brick or stone facades colored the same muted earth tones as the surrounding hills. Streets are narrow and shaded, desert-honed architectural choices that offer respite from sunlight and wind alike. Within these settlements, the cadence of daily life unfolds with remarkable continuity. Children herd goats before sunrise. Elders share tea in courtyards, and women work together weaving cloth or preparing meals that bind community and ritual. This is where the ancient routes that once connected the Hindu Kush to the Indian subcontinent and Central Asia truly found their meaning. Caravans once traveled these river corridors with goods that defined early economies, spices and textiles from the west, lapis lazuli and precious stones from the north, grains, fruits, and metals from the fertile valleys. Even as world powers shifted and the Grand Silk Road declined, these river routes remained active veins of commerce and communication, sustaining local markets rather than imperial ambitions. Here, trade was not driven by empires alone, but by daily necessity. The need to exchange surplus grains for cloth, metals for tools, and artisan goods for salt and tea. The city of Kabul, having long stood as one of the most significant junctions along these corridors, continues to reflect this layered history. Set in a broad valley ringed by hills, Kabul's urban fabric is a mosaic of influences: Persian, Central Asian, South Asian, each layer visible in its architecture, neighborhoods, and cultural practices. The city's ancient citadel stands sentinel over modern districts, a silent testament to the convergence of civilizations that defined its foundations. Mughal gardens, early Islamic structures, and modern urban sprawl coalesce into a rich tapestry that testifies to centuries of adaptation and exchange. Trade is not the only story here. Cultural life pulsates equally through the city's streets. Markets teeming with color and sound offer everything from hand-woven carpets and filigree silverwork to fresh produce and spices. Artisans work in open-air workshops, their skill evident in the meticulous patterns of rugs, knife handles wrapped in leather, and gleaming metal vessels shaped by generations of craftsmanship. Carpets here are more than floor coverings. They're living archives, their motifs stitched with memory, identity, and regional symbolism passed from master to apprentice. Silver and lapis lazuli jewelry reflect geology as much as culture, linking Kabul's markets to distant mines nestled in the northeastern mountains. Evenings in the city carry the cadence of ritual. The call to prayer resonates across neighborhoods at set hours, binding daily life to sacred time. Families gather in courtyards and homes, sharing meals that reflect the seasonal bounty of the valleys. Kabuli polo, with its long grain rice, caramelized carrots, raisins, and nuts served atop tender lamb or chicken, is not simply food. It is an expression of hospitality, celebration, and shared identity. Mantu and ashak, steam-filled dumplings and thin, vegetable-filled pastries respectively, echo the land's rhythms through their ingredients and communal preparation. Meals overlap with laughter, storytelling, and a subtle passing of cultural memory from one generation to the next. Beyond Kabul, the river corridors widen and branch, reaching farther into the eastern plains where seasonal inundation nourishes fields and pastures. Here, summer rains swell tributaries that in turn feed irrigation channels, expanding agricultural capacity. Wheat, soybeans, and fruit orchards proliferate where water is managed with careful precision. Villages align themselves along these tributaries, not roads, because until recently water, not infrastructure, dictated the rhythms of settlement. Fields are laid out in patchwork patterns, each cultivated patch a testament to the labor of families and communities who understand that every inch of arable land is precious. As one moves further east toward Nangarhar and the Afghan-Pakistan borderlands, the geography shifts again from broad riparian networks to more enclosed valleys cut into foothills and mountains. Yet these valleys remain intimately tied to water and seasonal movement, with paths that follow river courses into narrow gorges where access is controlled by terrain more than by political boundaries. Here, communities adapt to cooler winds and steeper slopes, modifying terrace agriculture and herding patterns to suit their environment. Goats, prized for their resilience, traverse rocky slopes with sure-footed grace, while sheep yield wool that becomes material both for winter clothing and for trade. Across these valleys, wildlife coexists with human life in subtle ways. Along the riverbanks, herons, kingfishers, and egrets hunt small fish and insects, their vibrant plumes contrasting with the earth tones of the surrounding land. In the surrounding hills, foxes, jackals, and small carnivores patrol their territories at dawn and dusk. Raptors circle high above, riding thermals in silent, patient loops. The presence of wildlife is not an anomaly here. It is central to the ecological balance of these valleys, where water brings the land to life, and each species finds its niche within the interplay of earth and river. Yet while these rivers nourish life, they also command respect for their seasonality. Spring's snowmelt can transform gentle channels into rushing torrents, reshaping riverbanks and requiring constant attention to irrigation works. Canal embankments are reinforced each year, timing carefully calculated to avoid winter floods or summer scarcity. Farmers and herders alike watch the skies and snowpack far above. They're planning an annual negotiation with forces larger than any single community. In this part of Afghanistan, water is both sustenance and sovereign, dictating when crops will grow, where settlements can survive, and how trade routes may be organized. Along these eastern corridors, trade continues from smaller market towns into rural valleys. Traders haul dried fruits, nuts, and spices toward larger cities, while livestock, woven textiles, and metals travel in the other direction, toward regional markets or onto distant caravan stops. These exchanges are ancient, their routes laid down long before modern highways, and they persist because they reflect an organic understanding of geography. Where water flows, people follow. Where land tilts toward more arable soil, settlements grow. Where valleys connect, commerce travels. In the rural heartlands of these valleys, daily life unfolds with remarkable continuity. Children rise early to fetch water, tend to livestock, and assist in fields before the sun climbs high. Women work in coordinated groups to prepare meals, bake bread in clay ovens heated with local fuels, and weave cloth patterns that speak both of local identity and regional influence. Tea, a social glue that ties together conversation, negotiation, and hospitality, is offered reflexively before any other social exchange, reflecting a cultural emphasis on welcome and respect. As the seasons progress, the river valleys undergo subtle but constant shifts. Spring blossoms give way to summer greens, then to autumn golds and russets, and finally to winter's muted palette when snow dusts higher slopes and frost lingers in lowlands. Farmers adapt their planting and harvesting cycles to these transitions, and the rhythm of life becomes inseparable from the annual dance of nature. Weddings, festivals, and communal gatherings are aligned with harvest times and seasonal markers, reinforcing the understanding that landscape and culture are intertwined rather than separate. In this broader narrative of Afghanistan's eastern river corridors, geography remains the dominant force, not in a domineering sense, but as a subtle architect of life's possibilities. Water shapes settlement, terrain dictates passage, seasonal flows determine agriculture, wildlife adapts alongside human use of the land, and cultural practices reflect centuries in negotiation with the natural world itself. The river valleys are the connective tissue that unites mountain highlands with plains farther east and south, a living testament to how landscapes shape history not only through dramatic features like peaks and snowfields, but through the everyday rhythms of water, soil, and seasonal change. And so, as the land continues its descent from high altitudes into broader valleys and plains, the story of settlement, trade, culture, and survival persists, weaving together human life and geography in a continuous, enduring narrative. From the great arterial river valleys in eastern Afghanistan, the land begins a subtle but profound transformation. Valley floors widen and flatten, soils deepen where water spreads across plains, and the contours of the earth shift from steep, confined corridors into expanses shaped by wind, irrigation, and the slow rhythms of seasonal labor. Here, in the broad transition zone that spills into the southern plains and eastern borderlands, geography continues its unrelenting influence over human life, but now intertwined with deeper currents of cultural exchange, trade, imperial history, and daily routines that bind the land across centuries and civilizations. Across these broad plains, the environment favors agriculture over defense, settlement over isolation. Lush fields of wheat, maize, and cotton roll gently between irrigation channels that gleam like silver threads beneath the sun. Seasonal rivers, fed both by mountain runoff from distant ranges and monsoonal influence creeping northward from the Indian subcontinent, deliver the water needed to sustain farms, orchards, and grazing land. Broad landscapes like these might at first seem tame compared to the towering heights of the Hindu Kush or the snow-covered peaks of the Pamir, but they have been shaped by forces just as demanding. Heat and drought in summer, flash floods in spring, and an absolute dependency on engineered water systems that determine where communities live, work, and prosper. In these plains, settlement patterns are visibly linked to irrigation infrastructure. Long channels branch off main river flows, spilling water into fertile fields marked by neat rows of crops. Dikes and embankments stretch like purposeful scars across the land, directing water to fields and villages. Farmers here are both technicians and custodians of water, understanding intuitively that access to canal flow means survival, a lesson refined over centuries through practice and observation rather than written mandate. The land is a living classroom, teaching its students through seasons and soil, reward and risk alike. To the south and east, the plains approach the borderlands that link Afghanistan to Pakistan and the Indian subcontinent. These areas, where geography ceases to be a barrier and instead becomes a bridge, have long served as conduits for cultural exchange, economic interaction, and the movements of people, ideas, and goods. Caravan routes once carried textiles, spices, metals, and grains between South and Central Asia, their movement governed by seasonal winds and the availability of grazing for pack animals. What began as commerce gradually became cultural dialogue. Language patterns, artistic motifs, and culinary traditions shifted and evolved, shaped by exchange as much as by survival. The city of Kandahar, already introduced in earlier parts, plays a particularly significant role in this transitional geography. Founded by Alexander the Great as Alexandria Erosia, it later became the seat of Ahmad Shah Durrani, forging what is often considered the foundation of the modern Afghan state in the 18th century. Situated on open plains with access to southern and eastern routes, Kandahar was never fortified by mountain walls alone. Instead, its defense and significance came from its position at the crossroads of cultures and trade, a center not simply of conquest, but of continued interchange. Here, in the broad reaches of the plains, the climate presents both advantages and challenges. Summers are intense, demanding careful water management and crop timing. Winters bring cool air that encourages rapid growth in seasonal vegetables and grains. Local markets reflect this rhythm. Baskets of pomegranates and grapes in autumn. Fields of wheat swaying with promise in spring. Diets adjusted to the heat with light, refreshing fare like yogurt-based dishes and cooling herbal teas. Meals are social anchors, often prepared communally and shared among extended family networks who have lived and worked these lands for generations. Cuisine here is deeply tied to agricultural cycles. The beloved Kabuli paleo, often featured at celebrations, combines long-grain rice, sourced from irrigated fields, with tender meat, carrots, raisins, and almonds, creating a balance of flavors that mirrors the balance required for survival. Sweet and savory, heat and shade, abundance and restraint. Light dumplings like a shack, filled with vegetables and served with yogurt, reflect spring's early harvest, while heartier stews simmered over long periods arise in cooler months, coaxing warmth and sustenance from every ingredient. Bread, such as naan and bologna, is a staple across seasons, baked in clay ovens and consumed fresh or stored for travel and work. Trade and cultural influence extend beyond food. In the vibrant marketplaces of the southern plains, one finds carpets interwoven with patterns that trace influences from Persian workshops to Central Asian motifs, blended with designs common in the Indian subcontinent. Silver jewelry polished with lapis lazuli, a stone mine deep in Afghanistan's northeast mountains, is traded for textiles dyed on Indian looms and spices sourced from the subcontinent's expansive trade networks. These exchanges, ancient in origin, do not merely move goods. They move stories, shared histories, and layered identity. In the rural villages scattered across these plains, life unfolds with a compelling combination of tradition and adaptation. Families often live in compounds where multiple generations share labor, meals, and social duties. Children wake with the dawn to tend to goats and sheep, helping herd them to grazing land along irrigation ditches. Grandparents offer guidance rooted in practical wisdom, where to dig a channel, when to irrigate a field, which seeds promise the best crop under current conditions. Women work collectively, preparing food for large groups, baking bread in communal ovens, weaving cloth panels that signify both artistic expression and utilitarian necessity. Hospitality here is a non-negotiable expectation, not merely ritual, but essential to survival. The desert and plains around offer astonishing beauty, but also unpredictability. Travelers and traders often arrive with stories of long journeys, blistered feet, or caravan flocks fatigued by distance. In response, communities open their doors generously. Tea is served first, a gesture that precedes conversation, negotiation, storytelling, or trade. Fresh bread and dried fruits become immediate nourishment, and in sharing food, the host and visitor participate in a cultural economy of trust and mutual respect. Religious observance also shapes daily routine here. As in the river valleys farther north and east, the call to prayer resonates 5 times each day, anchoring work and life to a rhythm older than any modern political boundary. Mosques, from modest village centers to larger urban complexes, serve not only as places of worship, but as forums for community decision-making and social cohesion. During Ramadan, communal fast-breaking meals amplify this sense of unity, as neighbors gather under open skies or shaded courtyards to celebrate both faith and fellowship. Seasonal festivals bind communities tightly together. In spring, when fields begin to green, celebrations acknowledge the earth's renewal and the labor that sustains it. In autumn, after harvests are gathered, feasts reflect gratitude and abundance. Families roast meat over open fire pits, share bowls of rich stew, and recount stories of the year's passage. Music fills the air, melodies played on instruments like the rabab and dudur echoing ancient rhythms. Poetry, long a defining cultural art form across Afghanistan, features prominently. Verses recited aloud weave themes of love, land, heroism, and memory into the shared consciousness of listeners. These southern and eastern plains, though seemingly gentle compared to highland passes or snow-covered peaks, are in truth shaped by challenges equally demanding. Climate extremes test crop resilience. Flash flooding can reshape irrigation patterns overnight. Wind carries dust across fields, obscuring vision and cutting at exposed skin. Yet these challenges have shaped a people whose identity is not defined by adversity alone, but by persistent negotiation with it. Trade routes adapt to seasonal shifts. Prayer and ritual provide temporal anchors. Artistry flourishes even where daily life demands labor, and the land itself is an active partner, not merely a backdrop. Borderlands here interweave not only geography, but geopolitics, historically and in modern times. Proximity to South Asia created corridors of culture long before colonial mapping took formal shape. Empires, both ancient and medieval, pushed through these plains seeking expansion, resource access, or transit to other regions. Alexander's campaigns left an imprint through city foundations and subtle cultural seeds. Islamic conquests introduced architectural, scholarly, and theological movements that remain for centuries. Later, the rise and fall of various dynasties, Ghaznavid, Timurid, Durrani, layered political and cultural structures that in many ways continue to influence local governance, traditions, and social identity. Yet, through all these historical shifts, the agricultural and pastoral lifeways of the land itself continued with remarkable continuity. This is where history and geography meet most profoundly. Not in the dramatic rise and fall of empires on monumental battlefields, but in the daily effort of people shaping water, fields, and livestock into sustainable life systems. It is in the meticulous management of irrigation ditches, the careful planning of seasonal movement for herds, the community coordination of planting and harvest, and the exchange of goods and cultural expressions across open plains. Trade here persists not as a relic of the distant Silk Road, but as living practice. Merchants and village traders alike moving goods that sustain local economies and cultural continuity. Religion, community, and geography continue to reinforce one another. Friday prayers, seasonal feasts, and daily routines form the fabric of communal life, and each village or town, no matter how small, participates in a broader network of cultural exchange. Music, poetry, and oral histories record both land and people as participants in a narrative woven through time, climate, and geography. Weddings, funerals, and community gatherings reinforce identity and interdependence, linking generations through shared ritual and remembrance. Children grow knowing the land as a teacher, learning the timing of rains and river swelling, memorizing routes to distant pastures, understanding how to read the sky for signs of coming weather changes. They learn the names of crops and livestock, how to navigate vast fields, and the cadence of irrigation cycles. They learn hospitality before negotiation, respect before calculation, and community before self. This knowledge is ecological as much as social, a form of environmental literacy cultivated through lived experience rather than written text alone. As the plains extend closer toward the borders with neighboring regions, cultural threads tie Afghanistan's southern and eastern lands into the broader fabric of South and Central Asia. Linguistic influences interlace Persian, Pashto, and various dialects. Architectural forms reflect Persian arches and Indian patterns adapted to local needs. Music and poetry resonate with motifs shared across regions, and culinary traditions blend spices, grains, and methods that echo both local ancestry and centuries-long exchange. In this broad landscape, where geography greets culture with open plains and shared rivers. Human life is shaped by continuity rather than rupture. Survival here is not merely about endurance. It is about adaptation, cooperation, innovation, and creative engagement with a land that asks as much as it offers. It is a place where ancient rhythms continue to breathe life into daily existence, where each season writes a new chapter in the narrative of human geography, and where the country's deep history is reflected not only in ruins and monuments, but in fields, canals, marketplaces, homes, and the shared laughter at communal tables filled with harvest bounty. The western horizon of Afghanistan stretches wide and unbounded, a land where the earth seems to drift lazily toward distant horizons and the sky unrolls without interruption. Yet this apparent flatness is deceptive. Here, too, geography shapes every pulse of life, from the pattern of grazing herds to the flow of water through narrow irrigation channels and the slow, daily negotiation between climate and survival. In these western borderlands, where the country meets Iran and Central Asia, the soil carries memory, not only of ancient trade routes and empires long faded, but of the enduring rhythms that bind humans, animals, land, and sky in an intricate ecological narrative. The plain here is broad, the soil deeper than the sun-baked clay of the south or the gravelly sediments of the east, yet it is a land still defined by its dependency on water. Seasonal rivers like the Herat and Kabul trace sinuous courses that feed agricultural lifeways and sustain villages whose terraced fields ripple with wheat, barley, and poppies. In winter, these plains grasslands soften with rain, turning green before the heat of spring intensifies. In summer, furrows dry and irrigation becomes life itself, coaxing fertile growth from the earth through the careful and laborious work of farmers. Here, irrigation systems are ancient, dug and rerouted over generations, a collective invention born of necessity in a region where rainfall is scarce and unpredictable. Navigating this geography, one encounters a continuity of human settlement that traces outward toward Herat, a city whose historical depth echoes well beyond its walls. Herat stands where plains begin to merge with rolling hills that trace the boundary between Afghanistan and the greater Iranian plateau. In the pre-modern era, Herat was not merely a waypoint, but a destination in itself. A flourishing center of craft, learning, architecture, and diplomacy under Timurids and later rulers who understood that geography can be an ally if cultivated through trade, scholarship, and cultural exchange. The city is a crossroads in more than a topographical sense. It embodies the meeting of Persianate culture, Central Asian influence, and the enduring traditions of the Afghan heartland. Its citizens, over centuries, developed an urban identity that balanced agrarian surroundings with scholarly ambition. In the Grand Friday Mosque, deep blues and glistening turquoise tiles appear almost luminous under the sun, their geometric patterns reflecting a synthesis of artistic traditions cultivated in both the Iranian West and the Central Asian steppes. Within these walls, carpets woven in local workshops display motifs at once ancient and distinct, patterns that tell of repeated reinvention, intercultural dialogue, and the steady flow of human movement across this land. Just beyond Herat's perimeter, fields expand like a quilt of green, punctuated by orchard pockets and low settlements where farmers till land that has been in their families for generations. Orchard trees bear pomegranates and apricots, their vibrant fruit a testament to the adaptive human ingenuity required in a region otherwise inclined toward aridity. Irrigation channels, lined with stones and mud reinforcements, carry seasonal water from distant runoff, a lifeblood that defines where crops can grow and where villages cluster. Here, agriculture is not merely food production. It is the economic core that sustains exchange, strengthens community ties, and anchors regional identity. In these western borderlands, however, the plains begin to give way to arid edges, territories where sand and gravel reclaim dominance, and plant life becomes sparse. The Registan Desert, an expansive feature in southwestern Afghanistan, stretches where wind and erosion have carved a landscape of shifting sand dunes, hardened clay plains, and rare oases that mark the presence of hidden groundwater. Registan's name itself, place of sand, captures its essence. A land shaped by wind more than water, where the heat of the day seems to press against human skin with a soft relentlessness and nights can drop into sharp cold. Life in and around the Registan requires intimate adaptation. Nomadic and semi-nomadic pastoral groups move throughout the year, following the seasonal availability of grazing land for their herds of goats, sheep, and occasionally camels. Their movement is not aimless but choreographed with deep knowledge of the land, knowing where ephemeral water holes form after rare rains, where shade might be found amid scattered scrub, and how to distribute grazing pressure to avoid overuse of fragile grass stands. These practices are indigenous, passed down through oral tradition, song, and the daily experience of living in an ecology where survival hinges on both acute observation and cultural memory. Such nomadic circuits run in contrast to the fixed fields of irrigated farming, yet they also interlock with them. Markets that emerge at certain times of year become gathering points where pastoralists and agriculturalists trade livestock products, grains, textiles, and manufactured goods brought from distant towns. These seasonal markets, once nodes on caravan routes that span deserts and mountains alike, are hallmarks of a regional economy shaped by geography and the rhythms of movement rather than rigid, permanent settlement alone. The Western Plains themselves, extending across the border toward Iran's Khorasan region, functioned historically as conduits of cultural and economic exchange. Caravans traveled from the Iranian plateau eastward toward Herat and beyond, carrying ceramics, metalwork, glassware, textiles, and Persian manuscripts that intermingled with Central Asian caravans arriving from the north. The result was not just transfer of goods, but a thriving exchange of ideas, linguistic, artistic, philosophical, that echoed through courts, madrasas, and artisan workshops across the region. One cannot speak of these Western landscapes without recognizing how ancient empires used geography as both shield and road. The massive expanses of plains and deserts were both a defensive frontier and a gateway. Invading armies from Persian dynasties to Greek phalanxes under Alexander used these plains as staging grounds, navigating the relative openness to chase opportunity and influence. Yet these same expanses could act as natural barriers, slowing movement, dispersing forces, and allowing local settlements time to adapt, negotiate, or resist according to circumstance. Even today, the echoes of such historical negotiation can be felt. The western borderland cities and towns maintain architectural features adapted to the climate and environment. Thick mud brick walls for heat insulation, shaded courtyards to catch breezes, cannon systems that bring groundwater into arid basins without the need for surface canals. These features are as much ecological responses as cultural expressions, showing how human building practices evolve through intimate familiarity with landscape demands. In villages scattered across the western plains, daily life embodies this continuity of adaptation. Morning markets bustle with the exchange of grains, dried fruits, goat hides, and woven rugs. Women trade cloth, herbs, and dairy products while children play near wells and shaded courtyards. Elder tribal leaders, custodians of lineage, law, and land knowledge, discuss seasonal irrigation and grazing plans, negotiating access with neighboring communities, and preserving an unwritten system of resource management that has evolved to reduce conflict and strengthen cooperation. Food here reflects both geography and shared history. Wheat is the staple, baked into various forms of bread, flat loaves, round discs, or hand-pressed tablets dipped into savory stews. Stews are often meatless in the lean seasons or enriched with goat or lamb when available, simmered with lentils, chickpeas, and regional spices that reflect cross-cultural influences from both the Iranian plateau and Central Asian steppe routes. Tea, black with cardamom or spiced with cinnamon, is customary at all gatherings, rising like warm breath between conversations and negotiations, a unifying current across differences in caste, tribe, or town. Beyond irrigation and settlement, the western borderlands also support distinctive wildlife patterns. In open plains and near fringe desert zones, gazelles move in cautious herds. Their movements alert to predator presence and the availability of scattering shrubs that thinly perforate the terrain. Raptors, including eagles and hawks, patrol thermals over wide expanses, their keen eyes trained on small mammals and snakes. In the dunes of the Registan, reptiles, skinks, and vipers reflect an ecological niche honed by temperature extremes, blending survival with precise timing of sun exposure and nocturnal retreat. Cultural rituals here intersect with landscape and faith. Religious festivals integrate agricultural milestones, seed planting, harvest completion, livestock births, with sacred calendars that signal both supplication and gratitude for water, fertility, and health. Weddings are communal events that often extend over days, honoring not just two individuals, but a network of families, kinship ties, and local identity. Music is a companion to these rituals, where string instruments like the dodar and harmonies echo rhythms akin to the plains themselves, measured, broad, and deeply resonant. Poetry, an integral aspect of cultural expression, often references soil, wind, and sky, motifs that trace the human story alongside elemental forces. The education systems within this region, though less formal than urban centers, are deeply rooted in cultural transmission. Elders teach not just spiritual texts, but ecological knowledge. How to read the sky for oncoming weather patterns, how to gauge river swelling during snowmelt, how to determine the most sustainable routes for herding during drought seasons. This type of knowledge, like language itself, is living and adaptive, refining itself with every passing season and extended drought, every flood and heat wave that reshapes the land. What binds the western plains and borderlands to the rest of Afghanistan is not simply geography, nor historical trade routes alone, but the continuity of lived experience where human adaptation and environmental forces are inseparable. Anthropology and ecology here are not separate disciplines. They are one and the same, representing a way of life that evolves with the land. People move when water recedes, trade when crops are in surplus, celebrate when harvests succeed, and reflect in poetry, prayer, and conversation, the rhythms of earth, sky, and human interaction. Across these western reaches, the earth does not merely serve as a backdrop to human life. It acts as a teacher, a partner, a force that shapes decisions as much as any law or political boundary. This metaphorical partnership between people and landscape is in part what makes Afghanistan's geographical story so compelling. Survival is not merely an act of endurance, but a continuous negotiation with the land itself, and traditions, rituals, and social structures are not relics of distant antiquity. They're active manifestations of that negotiation. The deserts, plains, river valleys, and borderlands collectively form a continuum, a vast topographical tapestry where each settlement, each grazing route, each irrigation channel, and each caravan path tells a story of adaptation, movement, exchange, and resilience. It is not the loud biography of empire alone that defines this land, but the quieter, persistent narrative of daily labor, cultural continuity, and an enduring conversation between humans and the earth they inhabit. Where the western plains begin to fade into an open horizon, a new land unfolds, one defined not by the blunt extremes of desert or mountain, but by breadth, grain, water, and culture woven through civilizations older even than the borders that define modern states. This is northern Afghanistan, a vast and fertile mosaic of farmland, floodplain, steppe, and settlement that has for millennia served as both heartland and highway between Central and South Asia. Here, the seasons are measured not only by the passage of sunlight and rain, but by the flow of rivers that shape the land and the lives anchored to them. Broad belts of wheat fields swell with green in spring and turn to gold in the heat of summer. Orchard trees, quince, apricot, peach, punctuate the landscape with bursts of soft color. And above all, The great river systems that define this region carry water and soil from mountain snowfields in the south toward the vast inland drainage basins to the north. The largest of these waterways, the Amu Darya, once known in ancient texts as the Oxus, is more than a river. It is a defining spine of culture and commerce that has shaped settlement patterns for thousands of years. Emerging from the highlands of the Pamir Plateau, it journeys northwest, gathering strength and volume from tributaries fed by glaciers and seasonal snowmelt. Its wide, slow watercourses have for centuries delineated boundaries, nurtured farmland, and sustained fishing communities whose knowledge of seasonal cycles rivals that of any agronomist. Here, irrigation systems extend like veins from the main river, feeding fields that stretch in orderly patterns toward the horizon. In this fertile land, grain has not only fed populations but powered economies, fueled barter networks, and sustained empires from antiquity to the present. Amid these rich plains rises the ancient city of Balkh, often called the mother of cities. Its history stretches back into the mists of legend, long before the commonly recorded chronologies of later centuries. Situated on a broad plateau fed by irrigation works, Balkh once stood as a nexus of early Zoroastrian worship, later a center of Buddhism before the advent of Islam, and subsequently a prosperous hub in the medieval Islamic world. The city's archaeological remains, crumbling earthworks marking fortifications, the faint outlines of temples, and the remnants of a citadel rising above the ruins, speak of long cycles of growth and change. Although much lies buried beneath soil and memory, the sense of antiquity lingers here like a quiet echo, one that resonates with the layered cultures of the region. From Balkh, the land spills outward into the surrounding plains and reaches toward Mazar-i-Sharif, another major city anchoring this northern landscape. Known for its expansive markets, cultural crossroads, and religious shrines, Mazar-i-Sharif sits at an intersection of ancient trade routes that once connected Central Asian steppe cultures with lands further south. Here, Islam has been woven into daily life for centuries, and the city is especially renowned for the Blue Mosque of Hazrat Ali, its turquoise dome and intricate tile work drawing pilgrims and travelers alike. The mosque's courtyard, shaded by arcades and alive with birds, becomes especially vivid during news festivals when thousands gather to witness the raising of the sacred banner, an annual ritual believed to signal the fortunes of the coming year. Agricultural life in the northern plains is deeply intertwined with these religious and cultural rhythms. From early spring plowing to autumn harvest festivals, communities align their labor with both celestial and terrestrial cycles, observing the traditions passed down through generation after generation. Streets that bustle with traders at dawn reflect markets anchored in centuries-old exchange networks. Carpets, grains, dried fruits, and nuts, all products of this rich ecological corridor, trade hands alongside fabrics, metalwork, and performances of traditional music. Long-distance caravans once moved through these plains as well, their movements regulated by seasonal rains, summer heat, and the pattern of river flows linking markets near the Amu Darya with cities to the east and west. Yet northern Afghanistan is not merely irrigated farmland and irrigated lowlands. It is a landscape with complex ecological gradients. Beyond the immediate floodplains and agricultural belts, steppe grasslands extend northward, breaking into tussock grasses and shrubs adapted to the semi-arid climate. In these transitional zones, life takes on a distinctly nomadic pulse. Shepherds move flocks of sheep, goats, and occasionally cattle across grazing lands that swell after winter precipitation but thin dramatically in summer. Their movements are strategic, seeking fresh pasture while avoiding overgrazing fragile soils. These herding networks link villages and towns across great distances, creating seasonal circuits that are as essential to survival as irrigation is to farming. Wildlife here also marks the transition between ecology and human use of the land. On open steppe, wild gazelles move in cautious herds, their graceful bodies a constant reminder of the broader web of life beyond cultivated fields. Birds of prey, eagles, buzzards, steppe falcons, ride thermal updrafts over low hills and open ground, scanning for small mammals and reptiles that also mark these grassland ecosystems. Smaller creatures, hares, foxes, badgers, emerge from their burrows at dawn and dusk, coexisting in a delicate balance with human agrarian systems. The northern plains, while fertile, are neither tame nor static. They're dynamic spaces where human activity and natural cycles continually negotiate boundaries. Traveling further north from Mazar-i-Sharif, the plains narrow, and as they approach the margins of the Central Asian deserts, the environment begins to shift subtly toward more arid conditions. The heat becomes drier. Summer winds carry dust in slow, swirling eddies, and beyond the irrigated belts, the land opens into expanses of hard-pan soils and scattered drought-tolerant shrubs. Here, too, nomadic and semi-nomadic groups continue long-standing patterns of seasonal movement, their herds following water and grazing paths mapped over centuries of oral tradition. These connections among diverse ecologies illustrate how the northern region is not simply a transition zone, but a bridge linking the wetter, river-fed agricultural plains to the broader continental steppe and desert systems that extend deep into Central Asia. The ancient Silk Road's northern branches once coursed through these lands as well, linking cities like Balkh and Mazar-i-Sharif to distant trading networks that reach toward the Oxus River's headwaters and beyond into Central Asia's vast interior. Caravans here carried not only goods, silk, spices, metals, glass, but ideas, astronomical knowledge, poetry, mathematics, medicinal practices, and religious thought traveled these routes alongside merchandise, shaping intellectual life across diverse cultures. It was in such places that scholars debated philosophy beneath shaded colonnades, where language families intermingled, and where architectural forms borrowed from Persian, Turkic, and South Asian traditions interlaced into distinctive regional styles. Agricultural engineering in the north also reflected this complexity of cultural exchange and environmental adaptation. The system of qanats, underground channels that captured and transported groundwater, was brought from neighboring regions and fine-tuned here to align with seasonal water availability and soil conditions. These subterranean lifelines allowed settlement far from surface rivers, bringing water deep into otherwise dry quarters of the plains. Farmers learned to gauge water tables, predict seasonal flux, and harness water at depths that defied simple observation. Such knowledge, technical, ecological, and intuitive, became central to daily life, sustained not through formal schooling, but through lived practice, conversation, and cumulative wisdom passed down across generations. The human presence, organized by both land and water, also reflected a dense network of communities ranging from small riverbank villages to significant urban centers. Villages near water channels clustered soils dependent on irrigation. Markets emerged every week or fortnight, often near crossroads where distance to resources and destination aligned with demand, and towns became nodes of exchange, places where artisans and farmers met, spoke, traded, and shared information. In these spaces, daily life blended the practical with the cultural. Carpentry alongside poetry recitals, shepherding alongside religious festival preparation, grain storage alongside negotiation of barter terms for spices from distant lands. Within homes scattered across the northern plains, cuisine reflected both the local ecology and long-standing cultural exchange. Dishes often centered on locally grown wheat, maize, and legumes, cooked with dairy products from grazing herds and seasoned with herbs and spices that carried echoes of distant trade. Bread, flat, round, or pocketed, remained fundamental, often baked fresh daily in small clay ovens heated by locally gathered fuels. Dried fruits, apricots, figs, mulberries, served not only as nourishment, but as preserves that bridged the seasons, providing sweetness in winter when fields lay fallow and corn cribs stood quiet. Tea here, as in many parts of Afghanistan, was a central cultural axis, offered reflexively in villages, markets, and roadside rest spots. Served in small glasses, sometimes with sugar or dried fruit infusions, tea was community glue. Conversation began with it, disputes were eased with it, and agreements were often sealed over its steaming surface. In northern towns, tea houses became social centers where traders discussed prices and herders compared grazing paths, all underscored by the ebb and flow of water and weather outside. Religious life in the north is deeply embedded in community rhythms as well. Mosques and shrines serve as focal points not only for prayer, but for education, social governance, and intergenerational connection. The Blue Mosque of Hazrat Ali in Mazar-i-Sharif is not simply an architectural wonder, with its glazed tilework shimmering in sunlight like a sea of color, but a living institution. During News, the annual festival to raise the sacred banner, tens of thousands of believers gather in its courtyards and surrounding squares, invoking a shared identity forged in centuries of religious tradition. The atmosphere is one of reverence and community regardless of individual background. Music, recitation, and collective reflection mark a unifying cadence. In the smaller villages scattered along canal banks and floodplains, religious observance also intersects with agricultural cycles. Seasonal prayers for rain or for the success of a harvest reflect a cultural and ecological synchronicity. Belief and survival are inseparable. Elders teach younger generations that the land itself, its rhythms and fluctuations, is a living narrative, one that humans are called to read with humility, patience, and respect. Beyond the cities and fertile floodplains, in the more marginal ecologies where soil becomes thinner and rain more infrequent, traditions of hospitality and mutual support are no less pronounced. Travelers and traders who pass through these lands still encounter the age-old expectation of welcome. Tea served before conversation, shade offered before negotiation, and shelter provided before trade. It is a social logic distilled from centuries of living in an environment where every shade of sky, every seasonal shift, and every movement of water matters. Here, as elsewhere in Afghanistan, identity is not rooted in a singular space, but in the mesh of relationships sustained through cooperation, exchange, and shared experience of the land's demands. The wildlife of the northern plains, though less dramatic than that of high mountains or remote deserts, continues to interact with human life in observable ways. During migration seasons, flocks of cranes and herons follow river corridors, using rising thermal air currents and feeding on small fish and insects stirred by receding water levels. Foxes slip through fields at dusk in search of grain kernels spilled during harvest. Hares bound across fallow land under moonlight, their silhouettes echoing a quieter cadence of activity. Raptors, eagles, buzzards, steppe falcons patrol wide skies, their sharp calls breaking the quiet of open grasslands. The presence of these animals, wild, alert, and adaptive, underscores a central truth. In Afghanistan's geography, humans do not exist separate from nature, but in constant conversation with it. Movement across northern Afghanistan also continues patterns established long before colonial borders took formal shape. Seasonal migration, trade connections, and pastoral routes do not respect arbitrary lines on maps. They follow water, soil, grass, and topography. From the irrigated banks of the Amu Darya to the open steppe leading towards Central Asia, movement is dictated by landscape gradients, a collective memory etched into practice, custom, and instinct. As the northern plains of Afghanistan begin to thin into the steppe margins, the land gradually transitions into a mosaic of borderlands, where rivers, trade routes, and ethnic corridors converge into a space both physical and symbolic. Here, the influence of Central Asia becomes unmistakable. The faint outlines of deserts to the north, the distant foothills rising eastward, and the intricate patterns of irrigation give way to a land defined by movement, negotiation, and exchange. This region is more than a boundary. It is a meeting place where histories, cultures, and ecosystems interact in complex layers that have persisted for millennia. The northern borderlands link Afghanistan to the great civilizations of Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan, creating corridors that are simultaneously conduits of commerce and zones of cultural diffusion. In these lands, the Amu Darya serves as both a lifeline and a boundary, its waters nourishing fields on either side while its channels and oxbows mark territorial distinctions. Crossing from Balkh toward the Uzbek frontier, one encounters settlements that echo architectural and cultural motifs reminiscent of Samarkand, Bokhara, and Khiva. Domed mosques with glazed tiles, markets organized in concentric rings, and caravanserais whose low arches and courtyards still welcome weary travelers. These towns are testimony to centuries of interchange, where ideas of governance, mathematics, astronomy, and artistic expression flowed as freely as silk and spices. Trade routes crisscross this borderland like veins, connecting villages and cities to distant lands. Caravans from Mazar-i-Sharif might carry wool, dried fruits, and grains northward while returning with textiles, pottery, and metalwork from Central Asian hubs. Along these routes, languages intersect. Dari and Pashto mingle with Uzbek, Turkmen, and Tajik dialects, creating a linguistic tapestry that mirrors the interwoven patterns of commerce. Oral traditions preserve knowledge, stories, and histories, transmitting from trader to shepherd, from scholar to student, across both time and terrain. These oral threads maintain continuity in a land often buffeted by political and ecological upheaval. Agriculture, still a backbone of human sustenance, adapts to the shifting climates of the northern borderlands. The alluvial soils along rivers produce grains, cotton, and vegetables, while small orchards continue to the landscape with cherries, apricots, and pomegranates. Beyond the irrigated zones, pastoralism resumes its primacy. Herds of sheep, goats, and camels follow traditional migratory paths, often spanning weeks of travel to reach seasonal pastures. These migrations are not merely economic. They're social events, shaping communal ties and seasonal rhythms. Villages prepare for the passage of herders, sharing resources, offering shelter, and maintaining collective knowledge about the land's carrying capacity. The ecology of this transitional zone is rich with life. Birds trace river corridors, fish spawn in seasonal pools, and small mammals thrive in scrublands beyond cultivated fields. Large predators are rarer, but foxes, jackals, and occasional wolves patrol the edges of human settlement, reminding all that life in these lands is a negotiation between human activity and the wild. The rhythm of the seasons, flood, planting, harvest, migration, dictates the tempo of everyday existence as it has for countless generations. Historically, these borderlands have seen waves of empires and migrations. From the early Persian and Greek influences to Turkic expansions and Mongol incursions, the land bears the imprint of diverse rulers and cultures. Each empire brought architecture, governance, and social norms, yet none could fully erase the existing mosaic of local traditions. The cultural resilience of the people is evident in their crafts, music, and ritual, which blend local, regional, and foreign elements into unique expressions. Folk tales recount the deeds of ancient heroes, legendary merchants, and scholars, embedding memory into both collective identity and the landscape itself. Urban centers in this region, though less massive than Kabul or Herat, have historically served as critical nodes in long-distance trade and cultural exchange. Towns along the Amu Darya, for instance, became hubs for scholars, artisans, and merchants. Here, madrasas offered instruction in mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy, while marketplaces facilitated the spread of ideas as much as goods. In these towns, one could observe artisans at work, potters shaping clay into vessels, carpet weavers creating intricate designs that told stories of land, river, and sky, and metalworkers forging implements of both daily use and ceremonial significance. Cultural and religious life intertwined with these practical pursuits. Islam, introduced centuries prior, became a defining social framework, yet it existed alongside older traditions, regional customs, and localized practices. Shrines, mosques, and communal spaces functioned as centers of learning, social cohesion, and negotiation. Annual festivals marked seasonal changes, with ritual and celebration reinforcing the connections between human activity, the environment, and the unseen forces that govern survival. Pilgrimages, both local and regional, underscored a sense of shared belief that transcended individual communities, linking distant settlements through the power of faith and shared memory. Trade, scholarship, and cultural life were inseparable from the dynamics of political authority. Empires and local rulers alike recognized the strategic importance of these northern corridors. Fortifications arose along key passes and river crossings, not solely for defense, but to regulate trade and taxation. Administrative networks extended into villages, mediating disputes and enforcing law, but often relying on customary agreements and local leadership to maintain cohesion. This blend of formal authority and local autonomy created a system resilient enough to withstand the pressures of war, migration, and environmental change. Yet, despite centuries of empire and shifting borders, life in the northern plains and borderlands remained intimately tied to the land. Agricultural calendars, herding circuits, and seasonal festivals persisted with remarkable continuity. The land dictated schedules and social structures and knowledge of the environment. The flow of rivers, the behavior of animals, the timing of rains became as essential as any legal or religious code. Oral histories reinforced this ecological literacy, passing down information crucial for survival in a world where human ingenuity was constantly tested by climate and circumstance. Modern life has introduced new complexities to these enduring patterns. Roads, railways, and telecommunication networks link towns and villages to distant cities, while regional markets integrate local economies into broader national and international circuits. Yet even with these technologies, much remains rooted in centuries-old rhythms. Farmers still follow the same seasonal patterns. Herders still migrate along time-honored paths, and communities still celebrate festivals that trace their origins to ancient religious or ecological cycles. Modernity has layered itself onto tradition, but it has not entirely supplanted it. The story of northern Afghanistan and its borderlands concludes not with a finality imposed by empire or technology, but with continuity, an ongoing negotiation between humans, culture, and environment. The Amu Darya continues its steady flow, nourishing fields, guiding herds, and delineating borders, indifferent to the passage of empires or the names of rulers. Cities like Balkh and Mazar-i-Sharif persist as centers of culture, scholarship, and commerce, bearing witness to centuries of human endeavor. Villages and nomadic encampments, small but resilient, sustain practices honed over generations, ensuring survival, social cohesion, and cultural transmission. In this final arc of the story, the land itself becomes the protagonist. Rivers, plains, deserts, and steppe weaving a tapestry in which human life, ephemeral yet persistent, is embedded. Trade, scholarship, ritual, and daily labor are threads in this tapestry, each reflecting the complex interplay between continuity and change, tradition and innovation. The lives of individuals, farmers, herders, artisans, scholars, are shaped by forces both tangible and intangible. The soil beneath their feet, the flow of water through their lands, the guidance of oral histories, and the resonance of shared memory. Ultimately, the narrative of northern Afghanistan and its connections to Central Asia is a story of endurance, adaptability, and interconnection. The people, land, and culture form a network of relationships that stretches across time and geography, demonstrating that history is not merely the record of rulers and battles, but the accumulation of daily practices, ecological knowledge, and social bonds. The rivers flow, the wind moves across steppe and desert, and the people continue their work, their stories, their festivals, a living continuum stretching from antiquity into the present and beyond. As twilight descends upon the northern plains, the Amu Darya gleams silver in the fading light, reflecting clouds that drift lazily from the highlands. Shepherds guide their flocks to evening pastures. Farmers close their fields after the day's labor, and townsfolk prepare for evening prayers and communal meals. Above, the first stars emerge, tracing patterns that have guided travelers, herders, and dreamers for centuries. In this quiet convergence of land, water, sky, and human life, the story reaches its culmination, a testament to the enduring rhythm of a land and its people forever intertwined in an unbroken chain of history, culture, and survival. The land of northern Afghanistan and its borderlands, with its rivers, plains, and deserts, remains alive, a space where past and present coexist, where the human narrative continues to unfold in concert with the forces of nature. Trade and migration persist, festivals continue, and the flow of knowledge endures. It is here, in this intricate web of geography, ecology, and culture, that the story both ends and persists, a living memory etched into soil, water, and human consciousness, reminding us that some stories are never truly finished. They simply continue in the lives of those who inhabit the land.